Hello and welcome to How to Automotive. Today we're working on a 2010 through 2015 Honda Crosstour. We're going to be replacing the alternator. Before we get started, I wanted to share with you the part numbers for the alternator. I'll link these up in the description of the video. First thing you're going to want to do is take this top engine cover off. You're going to take a flat blade screwdriver and turn these screws at the front here 90 degrees, and then you can lift the cover straight up. It's held on with rubber grommets in the rear, so you're just going to pull up like this and set the cover aside. Now you're going to want to disconnect the negative battery cable, so go ahead and loosen up the clamp and then tuck the cable off to the side. Now we're going to take the serpentine belt off. I'm using a special tool that's designed to make these jobs easier. It's not required, but I will link this up in the description of the video. You can use a standard 14mm socket and ratchet to do this, but I'm using this special tool here. Put it on the belt tensioner just behind the motor mount here and torque it towards the firewall, and then you can slip the belt off. So the belt on this car was in bad shape, so I decided to take it all the way off. If you're not replacing the belt, you can just kind of tuck the belt off to the side. You don't have to fully unroute it. I will print up a diagram and show you how it routes when we go back together. Now we're going to disconnect the wiring from the alternator. There's a 10mm bolt right here holding the wire loom. So you're going to remove that, and then just below it is the rubber grommet. You'll see a rubber boot going over the main power supply to the alternator. So you're going to pull this back, and underneath there is going to be a 12mm nut we're going to remove. I just used a long extension with a 12mm socket and a standard ratchet and cracked that free and spun that off. Once you get the main power feed unbolted, then just below it is another plug that you're going to squeeze the tabs on the side of it and pull the plug off. The squeeze tab will be on the top of the plug right here, so you just squeeze it with your thumb and then give it a pull and pull it off. Before we go any further, I recommend you pull the dipstick out and set this aside. I have broken these off. They're made out of plastic and they break really easy, so go ahead and pull that out and get that out of your way. Now with a panel popping tool, I'm going to pop the wire loom holder that's clipped onto the side of the alternator off. So I'm using this panel popping tool to give it a little twist and pull the wire loom off. Then just below that is the AC compressor, and it has a wire hooked onto this harness also. So you can squeeze the tab and pull the connector off for the AC connector or compressor. And now you can take the wiring harness and flip it up and out of your way. Now I'm going to get the coolant reservoir out of the way, so I'm just going to pull it up like this. It just has a little slot that it slides onto, and we can tuck it off to the side here. Then with a pick tool, you can pick the hose off the radiator neck, and then you can take the bottle off and set it to the side. Now with a 12mm socket and a ratchet, I'm going to take this little triangle bracket off. So there's going to be two bolts you're going to loosen up. So crack these two bolts free right here, and then there's going to be one a little further in right here. So you crack these two free and take this little bracket off. So lucky for me, living in San Diego, when they crack these bolts free, I can most of the time just spin them out by hand. There's enough room to get ratchets in here or power tools in here if you need to. Go ahead and remove these two bolts and the bracket. And once you get the bolt and brackets removed, you want to pay attention to where the bolts went, because the bolts are different lengths. So I believe the outer bolt is a longer bolt and the inner bolt is a shorter bolt. So you want to keep them together and keep track of that. So looking down from the side and past the alternator, you can see the bolt at the very bottom here. It's a 14mm, that's the bottom bolt for the alternator. We need to remove that bolt. To do that, I'm using a 14mm socket. This is a medium deep socket. A deep socket will work just as well. I'm also using a flex head ratchet here, and I'm going to crack that free. I actually had to put about a 1-inch extension on here to get it in there. So a deep socket would probably work really well, or a medium socket with an extension like this. Go ahead and crack that bottom bolt free and remove it. The bolt is quite long, and it almost seems like it's not going to come out, but it's just enough room to get it to come out like this. So now that you got the bolt out, now you can pry the alternator off its little mount down there. I was trying to get this out without removing any more, but the alternator was just a little bit too big, so they want you to remove the radiator fan. But what I recommend you do is evacuate the AC and take the manifold hose off right here. So I got my gauges hooked up. I'm going to suck the Freon out of this vehicle. To evacuate and charge an AC system with a machine like this is a matter of just pushing buttons, so it's not a whole lot of work. So your alternative is to take the two top bolts here off and here, and then at the very bottom there's going to be some bolts on the bottom of the fan. You have to disconnect, and then the wire loom here you would unplug, and then you can pull the fan straight up. You have to take off some splash shields from the bottom to get to the bottom bolts on the fan, and that means racking the vehicle up or jacking the vehicle up. So for me, that's a lot of work. So what I'm going to do is take a 10mm socket right here and a little ratchet and take the fasteners off holding the manifold hose here. And once you get these loosened up and cracked free, you should be able to pull the manifold hose off. And once you get the hose pulled off and removed, now you can just take it and flex it up and out of your way. Now there's plenty of room to remove the alternator. Before we put the new alternator in, there's a little dowel bushing right here on the mount. If you tap it over just a little bit, the alternator will slide over this nice and easy. Now you can slip the replacement alternator into position. The larger mounts on the bottom here. So once you get that mounted onto the little tab or the little ears that it's mounted on, then you can put the 14mm bolt through it. So once you got the bottom bolt started and run in about 90% of the way, then you can take the little triangle bracket and put that back on. So you're going to put the smaller bolt that went in the rear of the bracket on first. So screw that into the cylinder head, and then you can swing the alternator up to the bracket and start the bolt. So I had to kind of float the alternator with one hand and then start the bolt with the other hand. Once you got the bolts started, you can go ahead and run them in and tighten them down. If you chose to take the manifold hose or the AC hose off, it's a lot easier to get a power tool than here. So go ahead and tighten both the top and bottom bolts. Now we're ready to put the AC manifold hose back on. Before you do, I recommend you change out the O-ring. After changing out the O-ring, you can go ahead and reinstall the manifold hose back onto the compressor. Then you can go ahead and tighten down the bolt and also the little hold down bolt that was mounted on the side of the compressor. Now that the hose is back on, we can go ahead and put the system under a vacuum. So I like to do it for at least 20 minutes. Make sure that there's no leaks in the system, and then we'll charge it up. While it's doing that, we're going to go ahead and install the belt. I recommend replacing the belt when doing this job. After we install the belt, then we'll flip the wiring harness back in and bolt that up. So here's a diagram of how the belt routed, just in case you need that. We use Mitchell 1 or Mitchell on demand at the shop. So after routing the belt according to the diagram, I cocked over the tensioner, it slipped on the belt on the power steering pulley. Now I'm going to flip the wiring harness back in position, and I'm going to start the AC compressor wire first. So I'm going to plug that one in. That's the furthest one down. So you plug in that one. Once you get the AC compressor plugged in, then the next step is to plug in the electrical connector on the side of the alternator. So you're going to push that in, make sure it clicks. After that, you can start the main power feed. So a trick I do to start the nut on the power feed here is I take a little bit of paper and I stuff it into a socket, and then I put the bolt in there, and that'll hold it from falling out, and I can feed it down there and start the 10 or the 12mm nut holding the positive lead. When I tighten it down, I just tighten it to it's snug, maybe a quarter turn more. It doesn't have to be super tight. It's made out of brass. It can snap off easily. After that, you're going to put the boot back on. Then there was a 10mm bolt holding the wire loom down. You can tighten this up. Now you can go ahead and reinstall the dipstick. After that, we're going to put the top cover on. It has these rubber grommets in the back that mount up on the underside of the lid here. So you'll line those rubber grommets up, and then you'll press it down until it locks into place. Then you'll turn the two screws at the front of the cover 90 degrees clockwise, and that'll lock it into place. You also want to push down a little bit. After that, you can go ahead and reconnect the negative battery cable. Now you're going to want to make sure that the power steering reservoir was back into place if you took it out like I did. So just slide it back into the little slot right here until it locks in. And then after that, we're going to put the overflow bottle for the coolant back into place. So it just slides into the little groove here and locks into place. If any of the coolant spilled out, you can go ahead and top that off. After that, we can go ahead and charge our AC up. So I recommend that you charge the AC to the underhood sticker under the vehicle, or look it up in your service recommendations for charging it up. Now you want to start the vehicle and make sure that the alternator is charging, and also check the operation of the AC. I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.